Okay, I'll take this again. Councillors Allison, Brown and Chalmers are in attendance. Councillor Jerry Convery. Councillors Craig and Devlin are in attendance. I have apologies from Councillor Fagan. Councillor Eileen Logan, I was expecting to attend. Councillor Logan here. So I'm not hearing a response, but I do see Councillor Logan's name on the screen, so I'm assuming she's present. Councillors Loudon and Ross are also in attendance. Councillor Jared Wark.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. I'll now pass you back to the chair for today's business. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Stuart. Before I begin, will you keep me informed of the order in which hands appear for questions as we go through the meeting? Right.
Will do, Chair.
First item is declaration of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest? No. Go on to item 2, which is the minutes of the previous meeting. Do any colleagues have any questions on the minutes of the previous meeting? I would move the minutes of the previous meeting as a correct record.
I'll second, Chair.
Thank you very much. We go on to third item, which is the resource plans and connect report on page 7 to 12. And I would ask Neil to give us a report on this, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this is a version of a report that we've brought in the past to the forum, and its purpose is to give a brief overview of key issues which have been identified within the forthcoming round of resource plans, and also to give an indication of the number and spread of measures which will be taken from those resource plans and reported against Connect in the coming year. Forum may remember that last year we took the opportunity to review how we did resource plans, and so we developed them according to a much shorter format, a new set of guidance, and we ended up with a bunch of resource plans which were much more focused on priorities. They were much shorter and sharper, so they reduced from about 50 odd pages down to about 10, 11, 12 pages, so they became much shorter and sharper. And that approach has been followed again for this year, and so we have a draft set of resource plans which follow that template. Section 4 describes a key part of the resource planning process, which is to do a horizon scanning exercise. So each resource looks at their area of responsibility, and they look at things like social change, they look at legislation and policies, they look at their performance through the local government benchmarking framework, inspection results or customer opinions of their services, and they use those to formulate a view as to what they should be focusing on in the year ahead. So table 1 in your report gives you a bullet point overview of the key areas that each resource has identified. So the resources are asked to choose the 10 major items, so to keep the resource plans compact. So the bullet points there show you what resources have identified. You'll see that COVID-19 features in every single one of them, and for the rest, they are kind of at what you might expect given each resource's area of responsibility. But in each resource plan, there's a paragraph describing what this topic is and why it is of significance. So as you'll be aware, we do try with each round of resource plans to improve the resource plans themselves and improve the performance reporting framework. So for this year, particular emphasis has been placed on 2 specific areas. One is that we've been trying to get sharper about talking about outcomes and the difference that resources are making in the delivery of their services. And the other is that we've been looking at our measures again to try and make them smarter. So you'll be aware that over the last few years we've been reducing the number of measures, but we achieved a large reduction last year. So this year there isn't quite the same degree of reduction, but we've been looking at the content of the measures and trying to make them better overall, and I would hope that begins to show through in the reporting year ahead. Section 5 gives you an overview of the numbers of measures, and that's been a key sort of metric for us in the past, but I think that's showing itself to be less important given that we made such a reduction last year. But you've got some figures there at 5.3 in terms of how the numbers have changed. So we've actually seen overall across all of the resource plans a slight increase in the number of measures, but we're still far fewer than the 800 odd that we used to have across all resource plans, and the number that we are reporting against Connect is remaining fairly similar to last year. So we're reporting 84 measures against Connect as opposed to 89 in this year. So it's a very similar number. Those are draft numbers. There's some internal checks that we need to do before those are finalised. So essentially that's an overview of what the resource plans will be saying when they are finalised. The expectation is that they'll go to the executive in April as a pack so that they can be seen in their entirety, and everything will be finalised at that point in time, and then resource committees will look to the monitoring of those resource plans. So really it's just to ask that you note the content of this report and you note the progress that's been made in the resource plans. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Neil. Do any colleagues have any questions of Neil at this point?
Chair, Councillor Brown's got his hand raised.
Robert?
Thanks very much, Chair. This report has the feel of going in the right direction. I wonder if I can ask two things. Firstly, on timing. This is a report which is producing resource plans for the financial year 2021-2. It seems a little odd that it actually starts with the draft plan in April after the start of the year. I appreciate there may be issues this year, but I mean, that's as it's brought forward a bit. Should we not be getting this in advance of the start of the year? So if you like, the resources have then got the full year period, if you like, to implement and to follow through on reporting. Secondly, just in terms of the actual objective, I mean, I absolutely appreciate that this is a more tricky thing to measure outputs than it is to measure inputs. And I wondered to the extent to which, as we're measuring it over 1 year, is quite tricky, and the extent, therefore, to which there have to be longer term targets in place, and how that fits in with being able to monitor a plan effectively.
Okay, Robert, Neil or Tom?
So to your first question, I mean, I think we have accelerated the process by which we develop the plans. So in the past, quite often, it's been quite late in the year before you get to see the plan. So a lot of the factors that we want to take into account, such as previous performance, we have to wait to a certain point in the year before we're confident that we know what the performance is likely to be, so that we can start to project forward into the next year. So it seems a kind of optimum period to use this point in the year between Christmas and the end of March to finalise the plan, and then to put it forward for approval sort of April and early in the financial year. So that seems a kind of optimum period to present the plan and then to start the monitoring of it. I don't know if that addresses the specific concern that you had on that point.
Well, it sort of does and sort of doesn't. I mean, if this is a sort of monitoring arrangement effectively for us to keep an eye on it, and officers keep an eye on things during the year, I accept that obviously there's some refinements in terms of what you've done the previous year. That's not quite the same thing as having the plan and the monitoring of the new plan, as it were, for the forthcoming year. I do appreciate you've moved it forward, and obviously this is a COVID year, but you'd have thought, just in a general matter of principle, you'd have had this, the plan would be in place, as it were, in March at the latest, before the start of the financial year.
Right.
Yes, well, I mean, it is effectively, they're written, they're just requiring small tweaks to make sure that we have everything that we require, and they will be ready in April. So we could potentially look to move that forward in future years if that's something that's felt that's required.
Yeah.
Chair, I think Cleland and I are probably going to say the same thing. I'll defer to him if you wish, but probably one of us should come in now.
Yeah, please.
Cleland,
Doesn't matter which one. Yeah, Cleland.
Tom and I are probably going to be saying the same thing. So Councillor Brown's absolutely. In previous years, these were coming to council September or thereabouts of a year. So you're 6 months into the year before elected members were being asked to approve the plan that you were actually monitoring. That was daft. So we've drawn this all the way back. We've reframed them, and we're bringing them in April this year. Two reasons around that. First of all, it's a significant change to bring them to this point of the year. You would also want to have a bit of reflection on the outcome of the budget process that we've just gone through before you finalise your plans, because council could decide something that would potentially fundamentally change an element of the plans. So we timed that for April. Where I'd really like to get to longer term is that the budget pack and the resource plan pack comes up together, but that would depend on how visible the decisions on budget would be by council. So I think probably just being a month after the setting of the budget is probably about the right timing, Robert, and it gives the opportunity for all resources to kick off the year with their new plan and then report back to members on it. So, Tom, was that kind of in line with what you were going to be saying?
You put it much better than I would have.
Are you okay with that, Robert? Okay.
That's fine on the first point. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. On the second point?
Well, the second point was the issue of the output things, and whether there needs to be, a look at things that go beyond 1 year, if you like, how easy that is to do. Just really a bit of a flavour of that, if you like.
Okay.
Yeah, so it may well be that others have other views on this, but I think a key part of that is how the resource plans interface with the council plan and other longer term plans. And I think what we've been trying to do in the resource plans is to move them away from focusing on simple processes and how many widgets we are counting to kind of raise the sights so that we're looking at what the council's trying to do in that longer term. To some extent, it requires the council plan itself to articulate some of that longer term vision and to put forward what the outcomes are that are aimed at and how we're going to measure those, and then resources can pick up on their part to play in that. So I think you're quite right. It's something that we would need to look at over a number of years, and I think that it requires the council plan to start to articulate that sort of vision very clearly, so that the resource plans you will see how they dovetail and they pick up on their elements of that. So in the next few years we will be looking to review the council plan to that effect, and we should start to see that coming through in the resource plans as well.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Nothing of what I said was intended to be critical of the report, because it's obviously moving forward on that particular front. It's a good report. Thanks.
Okay, Robert. Maureen?
I had my hand up before Robert spoke, but it was really to say, well done, guys, in bringing that forward, because I always thought it was extremely odd that we were looking at resource plans halfway through the year. So I know that'll have been a tremendous amount of work to pull that right back. And I agree with what Cleland was saying, and hopefully we get the council plan aligned with the community plan and it all starts to make tons more sense to us. Thanks very much.
Okay. I think Councillor Allison.
Chair, COVID-19 response and recovery is a key in every group, but one of the things we did at the budget was highlight just over £2 million for education in that area. And whereas I can understand we won't have a time scale because we don't know when we can start really to recover. When will we get indication as to how that money will be spent, not necessarily when? Basically, what on?
I think really not sure if that's an answer that we can give at this committee. Alec, I think we really need to be looking at Tony coming back with some answers. I think the week after budget's maybe a bit early. Cleland, would you like to come in on that one?
I would do, Chair, but I also see Councillor Loudon as the policy lead in that area has come in, so I'll maybe defer to her. I'll add anything after Katie's spoken. Thanks.
Okay, Katie.
Hi, thanks, Cleland. Thanks, Chair. Hi, Alex. It was just to say that we'll be bringing forward things through the Education Committee as well, so things will get proper scrutiny in there. So we'll be asking for an update at committee as to how that money is going to be invested and what it's going to be for. A key part of making that investment was that it would be very flexible as well, and we'll be able to sort of target it where the officers best think it's needed in terms of making operational decisions. As you said, obviously not all our children are back in person learning at the moment. Hopefully that will be happening over the coming weeks and months, all being well with the criteria which the government had set out in order for that to happen. Excuse me. So as that process develops, we'll be able to see more where the money is needed. Of course, a large part of it was to tackle learning loss as well. And to sort of deal with whatever hits us when all of the children are back. So it's going to be targeted towards sort of closing that learning loss gap, managing well-being as well, and promoting sort of people's well-being as they settle back in. So some of that will need to remain to be seen at the moment. It's very much going to be what teachers, council officers and so on decide is needed in the moment.
Thanks very much, Katie. I see we'll get Des here as well. Des, would you like to come in on that?
Yeah, sorry, thanks, Chair, for that. Yes, I think it's just to give a wee flavour. I think it's Councillor Loudon has suggested we're taking a report to committee, but I think I would endorse what Neil was saying. I mean, I think all resources would welcome the opportunity for the resource plans to come forward quicker. But to give Councillor Allison a wee flavour, we have spent something in the region of 1.4 million for digital devices, which means that we've got 5,500 young people who've been provided with Chromebooks, 800 families with connectivity solutions. Obviously, during that COVID period, the council has spent investment in supporting vulnerable children and young people. And that's sitting, even if you look at the figures for yesterday, 1,400 primary kids in school who are deemed vulnerable and 370 in secondary. So that level of support is there. And we've seen, obviously, the investment that the council has made over the last week in education. And then just to give you another wee bit of the storyboard, there's 7,500 young children in our early years in nurseries. So all of that is probably what we've been looking at and how we've been investing. That's tied into the golden thread, as we say, the council plan, education's priorities. And I think one of the ones that I would also take the opportunity in this COVID-19, as Neil said, it's sometimes you don't count the widgets, you count what's making an impact. And I think that's been our focus for resource plans this week, guided by Neil. And I would finish up by saying that one measure that would never really a feature in any of our plans beforehand should be the universal support offered by this council from community resources, finance and corporate, etc., to support the return of pupils since August this year, which has been challenging to say the least. But Danny Lowe chaired a group right across the authority to help us get there. And that's very hard to measure. So I put those things forward just in terms of Councillor Allison's questions around some of the snapshot of education, just to give a wee story. Thank you.
Thanks, Des. Cleland, did you want to say something?
Yeah, without extending it too much, because the update from Councillor Loudon and Des kind of gives a kind of flavour of that. I had a meeting with Tony last week where we were discussing some of this. So we have the allocation the council agreed in its budget of 2.25 million effectively. We also have the announcement from the Scottish Government Cabinet Secretary for Finance, where £60 million was made available. So our take of that will be added per the agreement from council to that quantum. So that's a reasonably big envelope of additional resource available to Tony and his team. But what they want to do is to engage with colleagues in early years establishments and within the school sector, because they know their children and the needs of those children best. So in terms of putting together the paper that Councillor Allison was referring to, they'll do some of that kind of consultative work, and then they'll report back to committee, as Councillor Loudon has mentioned. One thing just to note, Easter is rapidly upon us. So it's possible they'll do some activity to take advantage of that kind of gap period, depending on what the prevailing public health advice is. But they might look to do some stuff over the keen recess just to start some of that kind of process prior to reporting to committee. So it will be coming, and hopefully councillors will endorse the approach that the resource is going to take over the next couple of years to try and address some of that learning loss. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Cleland. Councillor Logan, I see your hand's up.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair, for allowing me in. It was just, I was listening to what was getting said there, and something that Des Dixon said actually triggered something else that I'd been thinking about when I was reading these papers. If nothing else, the past year has proven that no one department or no one resource can work as a silo. It took everybody. It's not just education, as was said. It's the various different resources that tap in to help, obviously, education. And it's not just, say, community resources or whoever. Everybody has to tap in to help each other. Now, I think the resource plans coming in April is excellent, and I think that's the way forward. But if every resource is dealing with COVID and the repercussions of the past year, which, if you listen to the programmes on the television, even as all getting injected or vaccinations, that's not going to stop the problem for a long. This is going to be with us for a long, long time. Is there any way at all where instead of each resource, although they would need to put it into the resource, I understand that, but should there not be a common register as well that was brought forward? Or am I missing that somewhere, whereby where everybody else is feeding in, and what is the common register for the council on the COVID response? Thanks.
Yeah, I'll bring Cleland in that, because I think that's actually happening just now. Cleland.
Yeah, I mean, Councillor Logan makes a really good point about this isn't about silos and individual resources doing this. So in terms of the overarching COVID risk, it sits within the Council Strategic Risk Register. It sits within the individual operational resource registers. And just to give without going on at length, to give members a bit of assurance, at CMT, that's where we do a lot of the kind of cross-cutting planning around the COVID response that Des outlined. So to get our pupils back into school, even the phased return involves a whole range of different resources coming to bring their support, from facilities, getting schools ready, etc., the distribution of PPE, the support for education, the transport, etc. All of that is coordinated in a single council response, albeit that it uses a number of different services. But the register that Councillor Logan's mentioned is there. It's a strategic risk register, and we keep an eye on that, again, through CMT, and that is reported to committee.
Thanks very much, Cleland. Does any other colleague have any other questions on this item? No, I'd move the recommendations then.
I'll second, Chair.
Thank you very much. We move on to item 4, which is the red and amber results at Q2, pages 13 to 22. And I would ask Tom to give us a report on this, please.
Thanks, Chair. Yep, this report brings to the forum a summary of the performance measures where the improved results have been recorded as either red or amber, and that was at Q2 in 2020-21. Now, we've been bringing this report to the forum since 2011, and what it does is it pulls together those red and amber measures that have appeared already in the relevant place. So for Connect measures, they come to this forum, and for against resource plans, they go to the relevant committee. So they've appeared elsewhere before, but we pull them together in this report for a chance to look at them in the round. Now, the RAG definition is there for you at 3.1 in the report, but you're all very familiar with it, so I'll skim over that and take you to section 4, which is where the real detail of this report lies. So it says that in 2021, there are 237 measures across all resources, and it makes a point that the vast majority of those were not showing at red or amber. 91% were reporting at blue, green, or report later. which left 21 measures reporting at red or amber. Now, full detail of all those 21 measures are in Appendix 1 to this report, and as well as highlighting what those are, it also brings with it some management commentary in terms of progress that's been made so far and the kind of thing like any actions that are being taken to try and correct the position. You'll find, as you would not be surprised to hear, that COVID-19 features prominently in that appendix. So jumping back up, we've taken the results from Appendix 1 and given you a couple of tables to show you a bit of context for those. So Table 1 shows the red and ambers as per resource, and you'll see the 18 ambers there and the 3 reds at 2021 in those tables against previous years. And Table 2 takes the same figures but breaks them down this time against priority, including the best value theme that we add to that. That's essentially the covering report. As I say, the detail is mostly in the appendix. I'm happy to take any questions. We're asking you to note these, but more importantly, probably there are colleagues from different resources around the table, as it were, to get into the detail of this if you wish to do so.
Thanks very much, Tom. Does any colleague have any questions? Robert, I see your hands up.
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. It's obviously a very interesting report, a lot of interesting detail in it, and obviously shaped by the COVID thing as well. Could I ask 2 or 3 specific points, if I may? First of all, the community payback area, where for obvious reasons there's delays and hold-ups and things like that, probably ongoing, I would imagine, at the moment. Are we doing anything alternative with the people who are on community payback orders? Because these are obviously people that have been convicted usually of not insignificant offences, who've been a bit of a nuisance to the community and so forth, to land them before the court. And if the community payback thing is not operating, are we having other forms of contact there? That's sort of point 1. Point 2, I was going to just observe on the young people stuff. It's quite impressive, the things that have been done with alternative apprenticeship and college link type things there as well. Point 3 on the town centres, which is obviously an ongoing thing there. And any flavour of what we might be able to do there would be helpful. I'm conscious we've got the Lanarkshire Forum partnership thing in the background as well. But that sounds to me as if it's going to be a really huge challenge, which we don't know the detail of yet, if you like. And finally, and not insignificantly, breakfast clubs manifestly are not happening just now. Do we have any flavour of when they might perhaps be, what stage of the recovery process they might perhaps be put back on? Because not to beat about the bush, apart from their educational and social advantages, they're pretty important, aren't they, to the economic ability to support people go back to work and so forth. So I've ranged a little bit, but quite important issues, I think.
Yeah. Tom?
Again, this is the kind of thing I would usually lob to colleagues. So just taking the first one and payback, I don't know if Liam perhaps is in a position to come in and offer some explanation on that.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Yeah, Councillor, just to probably just a bit of background, the community payback and unpaid work service was stood down when the lockdown started in March, so we are still doing a catch-up for them. And even though it was stood up again during the summer months when some of that eased nationally, when it was stood down again in September, what we've got is that we've had to then just do contacts, which are remote contacts with people. In relation to those that are on orders, the only face-to-face contacts we have for people are those that are identified as high risk, and that's where there's domestic violence involved, where there's registered sex offenders, or where it's actual violence has been a feature of the offence. So they're still maintained in a face-to-face contact, and that will be a minimum of their order. But it's just contact with them as opposed to them out doing any unpaid work. So we're maintaining the community payback order that way. What we've got is we're going to have a backlog going into the next year of this, but the Scottish Government have made emergency legislation which is going to allow local authorities across the country to underwrite 35% of all orders so that we can start to do a catch-up. At the moment we've got 40,000 hours of orders that we are trying to do that in backlog. So that will write off 14,000 hours, and that will allow us to get through some of those orders quicker than expected. The only ones where there's an exception to that will be those high risk offenders, as I say, domestic violence, registered sex offenders, or where there's violence in the community. In terms of individual work, we do still do phone contacts and welfare contacts, but as I say, that's just about contacts to make sure that people that their welfare is okay during this state. And when we actually come out of lockdown, hopefully we'll be able to get the squads up and running again at Auchintiver and start to do more of that community reparation that should be part of the order. I hope that answers your question. If there's anything else. Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much. On the education side, maybe Des may be able to help there.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, a good point by Councillor Brown. I think we have asked ourselves that same question. When can we open breakfast clubs? And that's why it's amber, because we'd originally planned to open up our breakfast clubs just after the start of the return from August to December. And then hopefully when we got into the new year, that was our plan to reopen them. But along came the change again. And that change obviously was a phased return for some pupils and still the stay-at-home message. So that clearly has an impact. And as Cleland has said, that's been kind of risk assessed. Our model's slightly different from other authorities as well, where we employ some of our existing staff, and it's a number of volunteers who come in to support the breakfast clubs. So in all of that context, unfortunately, it's still at pause stage at the moment. But we're kind of counting that with the approach from the council in terms of support for vulnerable families, support through the school meals, etc. So we are looking about how we can support families. But rest assured, Councillor Brown, as soon as we can get the green light on a safety aspect, the Director is on the case to try and reinstate them. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Des. Pauline, could you possibly pick up on the town centres?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Obviously, town centre regeneration has been a key part of the economic development strategy, and that's pre-COVID, because people's shopping habits have changed over recent years, and that's not a new thing, but it's been greatly accelerated by COVID. And as members are aware, over the last 2 or 3 years, we've been with the communities developing town centre strategies and action plans. Ones in Hamilton, Cambuslang are up and running and regularly updated, and we've been to committee with one in Larkhall, which is going out for consultation, and we're preparing one for Blantyre, and we're also supporting other areas to support their own town centre strategies and action plans, like the Lanark Vision and the plan in Curluke. Alongside that, we've been very fortunate to obtain large amounts of capital funding, both through the Scottish Government's Town Centre Capital Grant Fund, 2 phases of that, and that's regularly reported to the Community and Enterprise Committee. We've got, I think, 10 projects up and running for completion in autumn this year, and these range from very large projects of millions, such as the conversion of the Royal Oak Hotel in the centre of Lanark from a former hotel, a listed building falling into decline and disrepair, and that's now being converted into social housing with Clyde Valley Housing Association. The Vogue in the centre of Hamilton, which is also going to be converted into social housing. So very large projects, also some smaller ones, community led, such as a church in Forth, which is being turned into a community facility, cinema. A much smaller project in terms of money, Chairman, but in terms of its impact on the community and footfall in the town centres, really quite significant. There are also council-led projects such as the East Kilbride project, where we're looking at the long-term sustainability of the East Kilbride Civic Centre, no longer fit for purpose, only occupied, I think, by about 10% now, and looking how we can potentially repurpose that site, move council staff and other colleagues from other agencies, public, private and voluntary sectors, possibly into the town centre in East Kilbride, increase footfall in East Kilbride, but also produce something that is of value to the community. You'll be having the community wealth building strategy coming to the exec committee soon, and that majors very much on 20-minute neighbourhoods. People should be able to access good services within a 20-minute walk of their house and close to public transport, and that then keeps our town centres viable and vibrant moving forward. And also the other thing that COVID has shown is that people working patterns have changed. People may work at home, they may go to an office, or they may go to somewhere else because they can't work at home. It's not suitable for them, but they don't necessarily have to get in their car and travel half an hour to their work. So COVID has given an opportunity to accelerate looking at people's working patterns and how they access goods and services, and that's very, very beneficial for town centres. And finally, looking forward, we do expect to have additional funding to support our town centres, but what has been lacking from the programme so far, the Scottish Government has identified 22 town centres in South Lanarkshire where we had to allocate their funding, but we're very conscious that there are a number of neighbourhood centres. I'll mention Halfway, Westwood and East Kilbride, Burnbank and Hamilton, which are technically speaking not town centres under the definition by Scottish Government, but are very, very important to their locality. They're within easy walking distance of a large population, and we anticipate that the funding coming forward will also enable us to do work and regenerate those areas, because that's very important to the local communities. Hope that's helpful, Chairman. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Pauline. Robert, I think you've had a very full...
I think I have, yes. Thank you.
I'm not sure whether Katie or Alex hands were up first. Which one was up first? Well, doesn't matter.
Katie's keeping quiet, so I'll go next. Just following on from what Robert was saying, is there any time limit on the community orders in that they have to be completed by a certain time, or they, I don't know, lapse? What is the situation there? And secondly, Tom, just an observation. Some of the red and ambers on the report are things that will automatically change coming out of COVID. The first one's a great example, the gas checks. Once we get access again, that won't be red anymore. Is there any way we could get a report on the ones that will be difficult to reinstate after COVID, that we are perhaps going to need to take different action on to be able to get them back to green?
Okay. I think, is it Liam, do you want to come in on the first point?
Yep. Chair, thanks. Yep. Councillor Allison, yeah, there is a time limit. So when an order's made at the court, it can be anything from 3 months to complete the hours to 18 months to complete the hours, depending on the amount of hours. During the summer, the Scottish Government made an amendment where the courts were allowed to extend the orders by anything up to 6 months to a year. And we've been working within that, so a lot of the orders have been extended. But that would have worked well if we were able to actually do the unpaid work, but we've not been able to do the unpaid work. So what we've still got is a backlog. And whilst we've still got the backlog, the courts are still making orders. So at the moment we can extend any order up to a year, but we need to think about the human rights issues of some of those people on unpaid work orders. If it was a 3 months order, it should be completed within 3 months. Hence the emergency legislation that says that we can write off 35% of the actual hours that are there. So for some of those individuals, we'll be writing off those hours. But at the moment, we are still having to work through the backlog, and we'll see how we go on with that. Does that answer your question, Councillor?
Yeah, it's still disappointing, particularly when we hear about the amount of rubbish that's lying around about masks, etc., that they can't be used. Yeah. And I understand why they can't be used at the moment, Liam, but they would have been an ideal resource to be able to use to tidy up.
Yeah, I agree, Councillor. And once we're able to get the squads up and running again, that's the type of work that we would be targeting. Thank you.
Tom, do you want to come in the second item?
Yeah, I mean, just to make the point, obviously it's up to members to request or indeed instruct reports to come before this forum if they wish. But obviously the example you gave, Councillor Allison, gas checks, that will be reported and monitored through the Housing Committee. And we expect that to be the case of all these reds and ambers, throughout COVID and beyond, as it were.
Okay, Katie.
Sorry, Chair, the point was slightly different in that should we not be identifying the ones that won't be naturally sorted out, if you like, so that if there's action to be taken, they are much clearer. Whether it's these reports, yes, these reports will need to come to the resource. Again, I'll go back to the gas checks. You can quite simply say at resource there, this will be sorted out once we get access to homes again. No issues. Another one, I don't know, off the top of my head, one, won't naturally sort itself. Here is what we're proposing then to do, rather than just this bland red or amber, which isn't really as informative, I don't think.
Is there not an action against most of these, Alec? You know, what the resource is going to do about that? And if it is persistent, I would imagine there would be an action against each of those on the RAG to show just exactly what the resource was doing to make it green or take it from red to amber, etc. Tom, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, as part of the ongoing monitoring process, Chair, you know, obviously all measures are reported to the relevant committee twice a year, and we just pull this together for this forum so you get the overview. I do think, Councillor Allison, that where there are specific questions about specific measures, I do think that the resource committees are the appropriate place for the monitoring to happen. But at your request, we can bring something more before the forum if you wish.
Okay. Katie.
Thanks very much, Chair. Just back to the topic of breakfast clubs again for a second to touch briefly on that. I completely agree with Robert. I think all of us recognise the value that breakfast clubs bring for all sorts of reasons into our schools, and I'm very proud of the fact that our administration introduced them. I think you could see through the budget process, certainly from our point of view, the cross-party group, the commitment to protect them was one of the very first points that was made. It's been incredibly difficult because of COVID. For public health reasons, we couldn't have children from other classes mixing out with their bubbles. Potentially, we could have had multiple classes and multiple members of staff self-isolating if it had just been business as usual. So there were all sorts of practical implications for all sorts of usual school business. But I just wanted to touch on one thing that I know which has been happening, and that is that many head teachers and other school staff have been using their discretion, and there's been multiple little pockets of good practice across the authority where school staff have looked at ways to sort of flexibly offer this sort of soft start idea when pupils are being brought in. They may be getting a sort of gentle activity to start. They may be being offered some toast and some fruit and so on. So that activity has still very much been going on. And I would just like to put on record as a consequence of that my continuing admiration of school staff and head teachers and everyone who's been involved in that to look at ways in which they can flexibly and responsibly still meet the needs of the children in their care. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much, Kate. I would second that. The education, the logistics in the education department over the last year have been enormous and they've done exceptionally well, and they really deserve our vote of thanks for the work that they've undertaken. If there's no other questions from any other colleague, I would move the recommendation.
Sorry, Chair, I'll second.
Thank you, Maureen. Can we then move on to item 5, which is the City of Edinburgh Council Best Value Assurance? And Tom, you something to say on that?
Yeah, happy to pick that one up, Chair. Thanks. I won't spend too long on this. As everyone's very familiar with, we had our best value audit in 2018 and reported in early 2019, and we suggested to the forum that we should bring other councils' best value reports before you, just so you can have a look at them, so you can view ours in better context, and also to see if there's any messages we can pick up in terms of best value from elsewhere. So that's what we're doing, and there's been one report since our last meeting, and that was City of Edinburgh Council, as you said, Chair. Again, I won't dwell on this, but you've got the key messages at 4. I would say that City of Edinburgh will have some lessons to learn from this best value. You'll see in there that there's talk of mixed progress, the pace of change in community planning perhaps not being as fast as it could be, and some questions over things like the performance and improvement measures they have in place. You've got key recommendations for the Council at 4.2. Again, I won't dwell on them. I think in the context as it makes our best value report look pretty good, and I'll leave it at that.
Thanks very much. We would like you just to bring them forward if they're not as good as ours. If they're better than ours, we don't want to see them. No,
I'll
is
take that
any
as an instruction, Chair.
has any colleague got any questions or wants to make a comment? Nope. That's great. It's there. It is what it is. Listen, I think that's the last item, and there'll be no other business. I thank everybody for their attendance, and that we did this for you, Katie, so you could get away early. Okay. Thanks very much, everybody, for your attendance today. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Chair.
Bye.